Welcome to a special two-part series of Kalamazoo Lively Arts exploring the idea of creativity. What is it? Why is it important? And where does it start?
Support for Kalamazoo Lively Arts is provided by the Irving S. Gilmore Foundation, helping to build and enrich the cultural life of Greater Kalamazoo.
If you look at little kids, they're always putting ideas together and saying, gee, what if something, Basically, creativity comes from putting things together that haven't been put together before.
It's imagination. When you really open up your creative sense, it takes that wonder, it opens out that imaginative part of yourself.
Finding ways to try something new, to find a new way of approaching a problem, that's creativity to me.
Generativity in general, like trying to come up with something new. There's a lot of question about what creativity is in general anyway.
Creativity, imagination, these concepts seem so obvious as children, but what are they really? We interviewed a number of people and dove into our vault to understand the nuances of creativity and how it's woven into the ways people live, work, and play in Kalamazoo and beyond. We start by talking with Professor of Physiology at Michigan State University, Robert Root Bernstein, co-author of Sparks of Genius, a book about cultivating creativity.
Tell me a little bit about physiology, first of all, and how you decided to kind of pursue that.
Well, physiology is the study of body systems and how they're all integrated so that we actually can live. I actually did not decide to become a physiologist. Ended up doing a postdoc with Jonas Salk, the guy who invented the first polio vaccine, and that got me hooked on doing research.
When it comes to creativity, people may think of the arts.
A lot of people do have this misconception that creativity is art and art is creativity.
So your book, Sparks of Genius, what's the takeaway?
The takeaway is that we can all be creative. There are basic ways of thinking about things which we use for all problem solving, and problem solving is just, the key step in creativity. So whether you believe in creativity and that's what you want to do or not, you just want to be a good problem solver.
Yeah, I imagine you have to be excited when you're doing something that hasn't been done before, because it's got to get you through all the naysayers.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things my wife and I have done is looked at almost all the Nobel Prize winners. And it's very common in their stories that for the first 20 years, everybody said, you're crazy, why are you doing this? You're wasting your time. And you think about spending 20 years with all your colleagues saying, no, 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 no. You really have to have confidence in yourself.
Yeah, right.
So that's another key to being creative. Helping kids to figure out what they're good at, being confident in their skills. And that doesn't mean being the best. I think that's another mistake we make. Everybody has to be the best or whatever. The people who succeed are often not the best when they're young. They just like what they're doing and they keep doing it.
If you haven't failed in life, you haven't lived. Because failure tells us that we've taken a risk.
That we're still challenging our own limitations. It's only when you cross the boundary of your comfort zone that you begin to open the lid of who you are.
And rid yourself of the box that everyone tells you to think outside of. And history favors the risk takers. Because only those who risk going too far can find out how far we can actually go.
You'll never read about anyone throughout history who successfully inspired change.
Because they followed the crowd.
Because they played it safe.
Because they cared too much about what other people thought about them. Remember that your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life.
It's only when you jump blindly from your nest that you can experience the act of flying.
You just have to be willing to spread your wings and trust you're meant to soar to heights you never thought possible from the comfort of your fear.
Don't allow the things that scare you to keep you grounded. Instead, become like the Wright brothers after their first crash and be willing to collide into the dirt. To
turn the toughest moments of your life into the burst of wind you need to get you airborne.
So that one day you can see what the bottom looks like from the clouds.
And know that just because your eyes can't see past the horizon, it doesn't mean that the world ends at the sunset.
As we talked to more people, we encountered a recurring theme. The way we learn and the skills we develop young help us later in life. So how does creativity tie into the workplace? How does imagination lead to innovation in industry? We talked to Troy Thrash, president and CEO of the Air Zoo, to get some insight.
What's really interesting about creativity and imagination, very different from like water or electricity or most other things, the more you use those, the less there is of something, right? The more I eat M&Ms out of a bag, the less there is, and it's so frustrating. But the more you exercise imagination and creativity, the bigger your bucket gets, and it continues to fill.
What's the most fun part? What's the best part of your job that you enjoy?
Well, it's funny, it really comes down to creativity. So in administration, you would think there's not that much creativity, but sitting in my little seat in the education department and working arm in arm with Education for the Arts, I'm able to give wonderful things to people. So cooking up the next cool thing we're gonna do, it's really, the ideas get really big. I'm an idea factory.
An administrative team uses creativity in all kinds of ways. So for a creative arts organization, it has every layer of ideas and flavors and colors that come together with the way that people think about problems and ideas to create solutions, not just for things like human resources or the way that your finances are presented or the marketing that you're doing. It's in all of those layers as well as the musical and artistic layers that we create.
The creative process is about problem solving. This, I think, is really valuable for children to learn because it helps them figure out how to fix things later in life. There are many different ways to go about solving problems.
And here we are in your beautiful Air Zoo. Did all this love for the Air Zoo start when you were, maybe about 7 years old?
When I was 7 years old, growing up in eastern Pennsylvania, I was finally brave enough to go out in the dark sky with my trusty golden retriever, Biscuit. And we took this little guy. My parents bought me, this is my first telescope that my parents bought me when I was 7. I had been reading books about astronomy and seeing really cool pictures of stars and nebulae and galaxies, and they wanted to take my learning even further by buying me this telescope. And I so vividly remember the first time that I turned this telescope to the moon and saw that it wasn't this two-dimensional disk of gray and white that I was seeing in photos and seeing up in the night sky, but it was really a three-dimensional sphere of mountains and valleys and craters. And the most important thing it did for me was not answer questions that I had, but for every question that I got answered, it gave me 100 new ones that I wanted to seek answers for.
And you took all of those hints of creativity, of imagination to bring you to where you are now.
After a degree in astronomy and astrophysics from Villanova University, I went to go work for NASA on the Hubble Space Telescope and at the Space Telescope Science Institute down in Baltimore. And it was a remarkable experience in so many ways. I had the opportunity to work with astronomers from all over the world who were scheduling observations on this, what I think is the most remarkable feat of engineering, this telescope that is going around the Earth at 17,500 miles per hour and taking the highest resolution, deepest images of our universe that we have ever seen. And so to be able to work with astronomers, and it was my job to kind of put the puzzle pieces together to build week-long calendars that said, we're going to be observing this object here. And then at that point, it's going to go either behind the Earth or something too close to the sun. And so then we're going to look at this object over here. And it was this most remarkable puzzle. And the cool thing about it was there was never one answer. And so it really helped me understand that when you've got these big problems to solve every week, that there are so many different directions you can go. And I credit all of that, again, to this thing inspiring me to ask questions, to use my imagination, and to be creative. And so it became my life's mission to inspire other people about the importance of pushing the envelope in math and science and technology.
So creativity and innovation is alive and well in the sciences.
Creativity and innovation, without them, I don't think we can possibly push the envelope of science. As we look around and think about, even starting from the Wright brothers, okay, which was just over 100 years ago, by the way, we were having this airplane down in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, fly less than 100 feet, in fact. Less than 100 years later, we're going to the moon. None of that happens without being creative, imaginative in what that solution might look like, and ultimately building that innovation.
When I met him, I didn't like him. You think I'm joking? I mean, look at him.
You can't say that now. I look better than you.
He can pull up the tennis shoes and the sport coat. I'm not kidding. I didn't like him. You know why? Because we came from opposite sides of the world, so it seemed. Opposite sides of the track, so it seemed. And not only that, but we were competing against each other. Oh. Someone says, oh. Okay, so, and when you're competing against someone else, how many first places are there? Mine, correct. That's how it works. That's how we function. When I met him, I was in that mentality, and it took a little bit of time for me to understand and know that he would be the person who would change my life. Oh, someone goes, oh, shut up. I'm not kidding with you, because I was at the age of 26. I was still having nightmares because I had post-traumatic stress disorder. I have all kinds of issues. I mean, my medical portfolio is about as thick as, I mean, you can imagine. Some of you are like, I could see emotional problems in there. And I mean, you've even had a chance to see it. And at 26, I had never told anyone what happened to me when I was a child. I was afraid that if I shared this with you, you wouldn't love me. I mean, why would you? But see, Gabriel at the time when I met him had the courage to share his scars, both figuratively and literally. And when he shared it, other people were like moved.
Art brings us together. That's what it does. Art is one of those things, whether it's a performing art or whatever, that brings people together. It's a common thread.
A common conversation. It creates a place where people can understand and empathize.
In your book, you studied like some of the great minds, Albert Einstein, Jane Goodall. Tell me about what you learned.
What we focused on were a set of what we think of as mental tools, or a mental toolbox of ways that people think as they're setting up their problem and trying to go through it. And some of them turned out to be things that people in the arts do a lot, but we found people in sciences who were successful doing as well, empathizing. We didn't really think about it, so we started studying. We started finding scientists who were talking about empathizing with a neutron star. Like, what the heck does that mean? Right. I mean, and they would play act. They'd literally become the neutron star to try and understand what it wanted to do and how it would work. Jonas Salk, who I worked with, said that's how he solved the polio problem. If I was a virus, what would I want to do in the body? Why do I want to go to a nerve? What am I going to do in the nerve? And so once I get inside that virus's brain, if you want, what can I now do as a human being to interfere with what it wants to do?
In describing the creative toolkit used for problem solving, Dr. Bernstein says that the arts are the best sources of these tools, and that brings us to the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, where Executive Director Belinda Tate discusses the ways in which art, empathy, and community intertwine.
So when did your love of art begin?
When I was a student at Yale, I was doing some research in the Beinecke Library, and I ran across 2 works of art, and those 2 works just spoke to me in a way that I hadn't experienced before, and in that moment, I really understood that art is transformative.
You brought in an exhibit recently, Black Refractions. What did it do for a community, and what was your intention for it to do to a community?
Wow. It will take a long time to unpack that, but I will say the 3 shows that we hosted simultaneously exceeded all of our expectations. I really hoped that it would teach people that there's a lot more that we need to know about ourselves and the world, and would inspire us to get busy. Some later research from an outside source suggested that it was perhaps the largest installation of African American art ever. Our attendance more than double what our normal attendance would be. But what was really impressive is comments about how the show changed them. One person talked about the show inspiring them to learn more about the history and culture of all people. One person wrote that it was so important to have kids here in Kalamazoo exposed to the diversity that's out there in the big world, and to be able to explore so many different ideas and perspectives through this exhibition that they wouldn't have the opportunity otherwise to be exposed to.
Belinda talks about how art can create empathy and build bridges in community. But art does more than that. It gives people perspective and skills that can go far beyond the gallery wall. Robert Root Bernstein says that after interviewing and studying creative geniuses, a set of common traits or mental tools, including empathy, emerged.
It was interesting because almost all of these tools are out there. People know about them. Many of them are actually in our curricula. If you go to the school curricula, they say you should do the following things. So there are things like observing. You know, every science class is supposed to teach observing. Abstracting, what's the key element out of all the things that you're observing that are important. Imaging, you know, being able to then recreate that in your head so that you can see it again, or hear it again, or feel it again. You know, you need to be able to remember things and work with them. But then there are, you know, things like modeling. We tend to give kids in classes a model. It can be a model essay, which they're supposed to copy. It can be, you know, a model of how something works in science, whatever it happens to be. We almost never have them build their own models.
At the KIA, we try to position ourselves as a primary learning partner for parents. And a lot of parents feel intimidated about bringing their kids into the museum. Maybe they don't know a whole lot about art. Maybe they feel uncomfortable if a child asks them a question and then they don't know how to answer it. So we try to support both the parent and the child in a learning experience. We teach parents to simply ask questions. Yeah. What do you see in this piece? What makes you think this way? What else do you see in this piece? Use those prompts to add in vocabulary to teach kids about critical thinking and problem solving and compare and contrast relationships, etc. This is a very well developed technique called VTS, Visual Thinking Strategies. It was developed by Philip Unawine, and it's used among museum professionals nationally, even internationally, but we try to teach this technique to parents so they can have better learning experiences with their children in the galleries. The other part of this is that most children are visual learners, and they don't have the opportunity to really talk about what they see. And certainly when you get into the examination of an image, it teaches kids to think on different levels, on deeper levels and in broader terms.
How does creativity help Kalamazoo?
75% of kindergartners today will have jobs in the future that do not exist today. When I think about the type of young people that Stryker and all of these other technical companies, manufacturing companies, IT companies, biomedical companies, just across the board, when I think about the kinds of young people that they want to nurture and grow right here in Kalamazoo, they're looking for young people that will ask, how can it be better for our community? And then use that creativity and imagination to ultimately create an innovation.
Creativity, imagination, and the arts are all important for employers. But how do they benefit a city?
A lot of times artists don't talk about the economic benefits of having artists in your community, but I've seen the downtown grow, and it's grown in part due to the arts being such a lively experience in living in Kalamazoo.
How does Kalamazoo, this whole imagination commentary, how does it benefit from?
Well, sure. Well, there's definitely an economic benefit to the arts, in not only Kalamazoo but in the state. And the last numbers that I've seen that came out was at $1.3 billion were invested in Michigan through leisure activities. And they call it leisure activities because that involves all sorts of arts and culture. Whether you're going to the zoo or going to a museum or seeing a ballet, it's all wrapped up in there. And definitely that trickles down to Kalamazoo. For a size that it is, I mean, the city of Kalamazoo is only 74,000 people, but we have our own symphony.
Having a symphony in your own backyard, how does that help your citizen?
So the economic answer is that if you're a Stryker, if you're Pfizer, if you're a larger corporation that's looking for someplace that's affordable to live and has wonderful hiking and Lake Michigan for your employees, and
an arts council
and
too.
has an arts council, exactly. If you're looking for someplace for your employees and you want to build a new plant here, that's definitely a draw. That there's also these rich cultural activities for your employees.
This is the Kirk Newman Art School, right? Mm-hmm. And you teach classes here. Those will be starting shortly. What kind of people take your classes?
When people get hired into Kalamazoo, especially the technology and the medicine fields, a lot of them from Europe. They come down here because they want to have something outside of their work, and they start meeting people. And so I had a retired engineer from Los Alamos. Can you believe it? Yeah. I had prosecutors, I had drug scientists, from Pfizer here. It kind of blows my mind, I'm like maybe the least educated person in the room.
Creativity. Employers want it, economies benefit from it, but do employees have it? The answer is not as black and white as it may seem. Dan Seitzma of Improv Effects uses applied improvisation to strengthen teams, culture, and leadership in workplace settings. He discusses where he sees gaps.
I've studied a lot of how the brain responds throughout life and how creativity and curiosity is something that a lot of times ends up sort of atrophying over time. And industry, workplaces are desperate and want people to be more creative. They want them to create solutions to problems and innovate new solutions to general problems to create new products or services or technologies. And it's hard sometimes to get people to get into that creative mode and to feel comfortable and confident getting into that creativity. If you create the safety that we create in an improv setting, in a rehearsal or on stage, if you create that safe environment, all of a sudden folks are sharing creative ideas, surprising themselves, and the ideas are just pouring out. You say, why is this so unusual?
In part 2 of this series, we'll explore that very question and more. We've found that creativity and imagination are essential for innovation, problem solving, and building careers. Beyond that, however, these concepts are important for human reasons. We leave you tonight with a preview of our exploration into art, expression, and Kalamazoo's vibrant creative community.
My favorite moment and experience was 2015, the annual celebration of success through Speak It Forward. I performed a poem that highlighted like struggles I had with my mother, and it was a really hard journey and a really hard process to get there. But once I performed that poem, and I did so with like the most grace, like I've never been more graceful. When I left the stage, I felt all of that weight still there. I felt like I could walk away from all of the pain that had caused me. And there was a woman who came up to me after the show, and she just thanked me for highlighting that story because she had a similar experience and she had never heard the story told in such a beautiful manner. And so just, finding those points of connection and knowing that I really did impact another person's life, it made me feel like this was what I was set here to do.
Support for Kalamazoo Lively Arts is provided by the Irving S. Gilmore Foundation, helping to build and enrich the cultural life of Greater Kalamazoo.
Success
and failure,
they hold hands. You just have to be willing to jump off the deep end.
Because pearls don't lie on the seashore.
If you want one, you have to dive to the bottom and take it. It's only when you dig deep that you can plant the seeds that will grow into something beautiful.
And we'll guarantee that when you wake up in the morning, you still feel alive.
It doesn't matter where you start.
It doesn't matter where you end. What matters most is what you do in between.
The steps you took to get to wherever you are.
And the times you got back up after you fell.
So dust yourself off. Start chasing your dreams.
And start living a life that will leave you with a smile on your face
and a strong heartbeat in your chest. And start that life today. Start by taking a risk.
Start by learning from your failures.
And start to appreciate the scars you have that remind you that you lived a life worth living.
Thank you.